Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. If you're new here, welcome! I was looking for a challenge for a new playthrough, and I decided to load balance just about everything. There are 0 factories with manifolds in this world. This is episode 32 of the load balance playthrough, and today I'm going to continue my nuclear power journey. I have set up all the train stations that will be bringing in most of the resources. Since trains drop off all the inventory at once, I will need to load balance each of the parts. I have a lot of different items and a decent volume of many of them. Get ready for lots of numbers, splitters, and mergers in this video. Once I have everything balanced out of the trains, I can set up some temporary sinks so I can get all these trains running. I like to get this done as early as possible in a build so I can make sure that the throughput is good and there's no traffic issues. And for that, you need to run it for some time. Let's get into it. Alright, let's get to some load balancing. So we've got a big, huge open space, and we're going to fill it up with just tons of storage containers and belts. So let's get started right here at the front, and we'll work our way back. So this first train is uranium. First 5 cars are uranium, the last 4 are sulfur. So let me show you how I do that. Alright, just to give me an idea, I just drag the lift down, and then I'm just going to grab my merger. Go ahead and set it there. Let's go ahead and set the color. Why not? We'll color coordinate things. And the reason for that is each of these freight cars are bringing in 200 uranium ore. It only pauses for about 30 seconds during its unloading animation, but I need to be able to make up that time. So I could probably use a Mark III, but a Mark IV just makes it easier to make sure that there's no issue getting everything out of the train. I'm going to go ahead and grab my container, and I'm going to set it right here. Since this is a Mark V, and the way this load balancing is going to work is I'm going to loop some of it back. I want this one to be a Mark V so that there's never any issues when I loop back that extra. So the goal for doing all of this is I want the exact amount that I'm counting on coming right out of the storage containers instead of having to use whatever the next highest belt is. So since each one of these are bringing in 200, that means I need at least a Mark III belt, but that means there's an extra 70 on that line. And so this episode is going to be load balancing all of the different freight cars into the amounts that they're carrying. And then from there, I'll get to do some more load balancing. So I'm going to place a splitter here. So we're going to have 270 go right into that. Since this is a full 270 belt, I can reliably count on 60 being on this belt. And then I can place one more splitter here. So if I use all 3 outputs, that would be 20, 20, and 20. So let's go ahead and grab some of these. And if I split this 20 in half, we've got 10, and then 10. So now I just need 60, and there's my 70 that I needed to subtract from the 270 to get me down to 200. I just need to grab this 50 and this 150, and we're good to go. And now I just need to copy this 5 more times. I may have to use a lift with some of these parts to avoid them overlapping, but that's an easy problem to solve. So now we're going to switch to sulfur. So these are all going to be a very similar setup where I use a Mark IV for I think pretty much everything into a merger. And then that goes into the industrial storage container. So I'm going to use a Mark V, so there's no issue when we're merging. Each of these 4 freight cars are going to have 250 sulfur each. So we start with our splitter. So we're going to be working with a Mark III again. So that's 270. I need to subtract 20. And that's pretty easy to do. So we'll grab a splitter. And we're going to go ahead and put it right here so we can count on 60 being on there. And if I split this all 3 ways, we can subtract 20 and loop it right back in. And then I'm just going to place a merger here. We got to use both of those outputs to get 20 on all three. And the remaining 210 groups back up. And we've got 250. And I just need to copy that 4 more times. So I did run into, obviously, a little bit of space issue. But that's okay. That's what lifts are for. You can just easily bridge that gap. Nice and easy. Alright, so that's the first row done. So let's go ahead and move on. So to make better use of all of this space that I've given myself, I'm going to alternate kind of heights for the different rows of freight cars. So with this row, we're going to elevate it a little bit. So that's too tall. That looks just right. We could probably go a meter higher, but since most things in the game, like the stackable conveyor poles, go in heights of 2 meters, I'd much rather just keep it at 2 meter instead of getting the industrial containers as close as it can be. So now that I have the height, I'm just going to zoop out a whole bunch of glass frame foundations, and we're going to build on that for up here. And the other thing I went ahead and did was, we can just delete this for now. I added some signs so I actually know what's going where. The first freight car was really easy to remember, but this will help me a lot. So now I've got signs for all of the different things that are coming in to kind of help me out. It's really helpful being able to come back and know what's supposed to be in each one of these and how much. So 120 aluminum casings coming from the red forest. This is honestly the easiest one to load balance because there's really not much load balancing. So we're just going to slap down a container. We can do it nice and close. Since we're doing 120 and we need to use a belt that's slightly higher so that we can make up for when it pauses the belts during the unloading phase, we'll just use a Mark III into the container, and then we can just use a Mark II belt out, and that's all the load balancing there is. So, hooray! Next up, we've got 80 iron plates. So we're going to do the same kind of spacing as before. So we get it lined up with the floor hole. Then we're just going to line it up with the end of that foundation. That gives us plenty of room to put a merger right in front of it. I could probably use just a Mark II, but just to be safe, we'll just use a Mark III. Whenever I have to loop stuff back, especially into a storage container, I like to use one speed higher than I'm using to bring this in, just so hopefully there's no issues when they merge together. So this is another super easy one. We've just got a splitter. We're going to do Mark II. So if we take the 120 and we split it all 3 ways, we'll have 40 on each belt. So if I loop back one of them, that'll loop back 40. We recombine the other 2. And now I have my 80 iron plates. And this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So 324 steel pipes. So we're going to start this just like the rest of them and go ahead and just put a storage container right here. Get our merger for the stuff that's going to loop back. Put a Mark IV there and Mark V there. So I need to get to 324, so I need to use at least a 480 belt. And then I'm going to need to cycle back 156. And at first glance, that sounds awful. But it's not too bad. So if we just do 120, that means 36 I need to deal with. So if we start with the splitter, we go with our Mark IV into here. So we've got 480. And we can start off by just looping back 120. So now I need to figure out how to loop back 36. And this is actually really pretty easy. So if we take a Mark I belt with 60 on it, if we divide it by 5, we'll get 12. So if we combine 3 of those, we've got our 36. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing we got to put down is a merger. So we're going to go ahead and put a merger here. And this is where things got a little bit tight. And this is the one thing that I really kind of hate doing, but we're going to go ahead and place a splitter right next to this one. I know. It's not what I prefer. So Mark I goes into here, But this has to be able to handle the initial 60 plus that bit that's going to get looped back. So this has to be a Mark II. So I need to split this twice. One side is going to end up with 3/5, which is our 36. The other is going to end up with the 2/5 and that part that cycles back. So we already know that the 36 needs to cycle back here. So it's going to be on this side. So on this one, I'm going to go ahead and add a splitter. So we can start by just looping back that part right now. And now we just need to use both of these outputs to make sure that we've got our even 5-way split. So I can go ahead and just place a merger down here. Grab that one and that one. Thankfully, it doesn't quite interfere right there. And now I just need to connect the rest of it. So since I started with a 480, I took out 120 and then 60. I still have 300, so I still need a Mark IV belt here. Put that right into there. And now I've got my 324 steel pipes. And we just need to copy that again. But let's move on to the next one. So 120 limestone. I'm going to go ahead and skip this one because it's just so simple and I already did that. 240 from the grassy fields, and this is sulfur. So Mark IV from the train and then Mark V into the buffer. So 240 is a really easy number to get to. So I'm going to show you two different ways, and I'm going to go with the more complicated, but I'll tell you why. So the easiest way to do this would be just slap down a splitter, grab yourself a Mark IV since that's 480, and then we just need to loop back half of it. So we can just put a Mark III into there, and that would be 240, and then coming out of here would be 240. So there's another way that is slightly more complicated. You take a splitter, you only use a Mark III belt. So from a Mark III belt is 270, so I need to cycle back 30, and that would leave me with 40. So if I just use a Mark I belt into here, that's 60, and if I split it in half, that would be 30 here. And now I can just grab a merger, place it right in front of this one, and then I can combine the other 30 with the remaining 210. And now I've got 240. So the reason I went with this more complicated setup is because now I'm only looping back 30 as opposed to looping back 240. And that just means this should have no problem and shouldn't back up. The only way it will is if this storage container completely backs up. So even though you want a buffer, you don't want too much in some of these buffers. But this way, only 30 of it would get backed up, and it has much more space to back up since it's only going to be using half of the belt, as opposed to splitting a 480 belt in half and having to loop back 240. You just have much less room to combine that on this belt. So slightly more complicated, but there is a reason to this madness sometimes. Alright, so let's go ahead and just remove this so we can see what we're working with. Alright, so now we are on to the copper train. So these first three are 216 and 2/3 each. So this is probably my least favorite solution out of all of the different load balancing I came up with. So this is going to be a little bit different than all the rest in that each one isn't load balanced separately and they're all load balanced together. So far it seems to be working, but we'll see if I have to revisit this in the future. So I'm just going to use a Mark IV out of the train into each of the storage containers, since they each are going to be transporting 216. Okay, and like I said, this is where it's going to get a little bit different. So instead of load balancing each one individually, we're going to go from 3 to 1. But that's why things get a little bit weird, and it's not my favorite way to do it. So by all means, if you have a better way to do this, I would love to hear it. I think a better solution would have been to not have these come in with 216 and 2/3, but we'll make it work. So I think I'm actually going to move this back just one more. Okay, so since each one is 216 and 2/3, we're just going to use Mark III out of all of these. Now obviously this is more than actually what a Mark V can hold, but it will be more than what the train is bringing in also. So it will stutter a tiny bit, which isn't my favorite, but you really can't tell. So the reason there's a splitter here is we need a Mark V belt here and here. Now these three are already more than what a Mark V can hold. So if I loop anything back, it's going to start to stutter. Worst case scenario, which will happen, I can tell you, because I played around with this already. This belt will end up starting to back up, and I won't be load balancing the amount that I think I am, because it won't be cycling back enough. So to get around that, I'm going to add a lift right here. So that way the incoming amount from the train gets split half on this line and then half on this line. Since this is already enough to oversaturate the 780 line, that means this is going to be split in half, which gives me plenty of space to merge any of the amount back into here. The trick is I can't actually let this one fill up completely. So as much as you want a buffer, this is another one of the systems where if this gets completely backed up, then you won't be able to cycle back enough, because even though it has two inputs, it doesn't act as a merger. A merger with two lines will take them evenly. It'll take one from here, one from here, one from here, one from here. When a storage container fills up, it's just going to take one of them, and I don't even know if there's a way to tell which one it's going to take. So if there's lots of empty space, then it's just going to take as much as it has room for. But once it fills up, then it's very inconsistent, and you can't rely on this working as a merger. So for this kind of a scenario, the best thing to do is make sure that you have a buffer so you get a steady flow, but it never gets too full. But now that we've grouped those three, now I need to load balance the 650 out of here that I'm counting on. So to do that, it's pretty easy. Since we've got a 780 belt we're gonna obviously have to deal with, I need to cycle back 130. So we're just gonna start with a normal splitter, put it right in the middle, 780 going into there. First thing we can do is go ahead and grab a Mark II belt and cycle that one back. So that's the 120 out of 130. So now I just need to loop back 10. So to do that, we'll just put a splitter here, and then another splitter here. So, and then I just need some mergers. But the way this is going to work is we'll put 60 into there, which is a Mark I belt. If I split that in half, I've got 30 going here. And if I split this three ways, that would be 10 on each one of these. So we'll go ahead and loop back 10. Alright, so let's grab some mergers. So let's place a merger right here. So I need to use both of those outputs. So that's 20. And this right here, I need to just split in half. So that's 30. So right here, I've got 50. And out of here, I've got 600. So the rest of this is pretty simple. It's just this part. It works. It's just not my favorite solution. I think a better solution would be possibly to just split one of these in half. You won't have the stuttering belt, but honestly, you don't really notice it. Or a better way, in my opinion, would be to better load balance the amounts that are coming in from the first place, instead of having 216 and 2/3, because that in itself is obviously going to be really hard to load balance. Just adding one more freight car, making it 200, 200, 200, and then a 50, probably would have been a much easier solution. But where's the fun in that? So for all of the next freight cars, they're all 200, which is super easy, but let me show you how to do it. So with this one, I'm going to use a smart splitter. So the way I kind of went about that one is I thought about how to cycle back the exact amount I needed. The other way to think about it is how do you combine to get the right amount. So again, I'm going to use a Mark III. I can easily get 120 out of a belt. So, and what I mean by that is instead of taking the 270, and I know I need to remove 70 from it, an easy way to get to 200 would be 120 plus 80. 120 is really easy. That's just a Mark II belt. 80 is really easy to make. So from here, I'm going to take a splitter. I'm going to put a Mark II belt into here. So if I take 120 and I split it 3 ways, I'll have 40 on each one. So I can go ahead and loop back one of these. I can grab a merger. So here's 40, that makes 80. And if I grab my Mark II, there's my 80 plus my 120. So here's my 200. So the way I need to set up the smart splitter is I need any and any set to both of these. And then overflow is going to go to the left. Since I'm already looping back 40, I know that this should only ever have 30, so I can go ahead and use a Mark I. And since this is going to be a completely full Mark III belt, since it's coming out of a storage container, I can be sure that these are going to be completely full and not have to use that higher belt trick like I had to use in the last video to make up for the gaps, since this won't have it. So I just need to copy this 5 more times, but that's pretty simple. So let's move on to the last row. Okay, I added the floor real quick. Now let's take a look at the trains. So this is where things change a little bit. The original plan was to have 4 freight cars have this 262.5 amount. And then it was going to be a similar but cleaner solution than joining 3 of them, because only joining 2 of them really isn't too bad. But after running it for a few hours, I found that this was pretty much right at the very limit of the throughput that I could count on from the Desert Canyon. The freight cars would come with everything full, and then basically that very last stack would only have like 50 or 60. So the wiggle room was essentially nothing. If something happened with traffic and it just got held up a little bit too long, then all of a sudden it just wouldn't be able to have the throughput I'm counting on. And I don't want anything to be that close when we're dealing with such a big power plant. This whole thing is going to get switched around a little bit, and I'm going to add one more freight car for the sulfur. I need 1,050, so instead of doing 262.5 over 4 cars, this is actually going to be 5 cars, and it's only 210, which turns out is a whole lot easier to deal with. So let me show you how I'm going to load balance that, because I know in the end that's what this is going to look like. Alright, so we've got our standard start here, and we're just going to go ahead and take a splitter. And this is super simple. Mark III, which is 270, and we're just going to loop back 60. And that gets us our 210. Easiest load balancing there is. So the way this is going to work is I'm just going to add one more freight car, because I wasn't using this entire train station to begin with. I thought I could get away with having one less freight car, but that was silly of me. So this is going to get all extended one more, but these 4 and the load balancing are going to work just the same. So let me show you. The first 2 are going to have 217.5 iron ore. The second ones are 240 each. So those ones are super simple, and I already did that load balancing earlier. So let's just focus on these 2, and that will be it. Alright, so with these ones, it's going to be a lot easier just to combine the 2 and do the load balancing from there, just like I did with the weird number with the copper ore. We're going to do that here. So from here, we're just going to go ahead and add a merger. Since we have 217.5, we got to use Mark III for both of these. Go ahead and add another merger, and then our second storage container. So I am going to just use a Mark IV belt here, because that will limit it down to 480, which would be 240 for both of these, which is slightly more or slightly less than what the belts can handle, but it's more than what will be coming in from the train. And then that way I can put a Mark V belt here, so when we cycle stuff back, it'll have no issue merging up. So out of here, we need to make 445, because that's what those 2 freight cars combine total to. So if I need 445, we're going to be working with the Mark IV. So 480 minus the 445. So I need to cycle back 35. So we can go ahead and just start with a splitter here. And we'll add another splitter here. So if I use a Mark I belt, we've got 60 into here. So if I split that in half, that's 30. I'm going to go ahead and just add a merger here. So there's 30. So now I just need to make 5 out of the remaining 30 that I've got coming out of this side. So 60 from here, 30, 30. So if I split this all 3 ways, I can get 10 on each one. So let's just add another splitter here. So that would be 10, and this would be our 5. So now I just need to merge things back up. So I'm going to add a merger right here. So with this one, I needed to use all 3 outputs. So that way it was 10, 10, and 10. And then I needed to split this one in half. So I only need to use 1. And now I've successfully split off the 35, so I just need to combine these last 2. So I've got 25 on here. And 420 on here, since we took off the 60 from the 480. And there we go, that's 445. And that is essentially how I'm going to load balance all of the freight cars. I just need to add quite a few more. But hopefully that helped if any of you were looking to load balance right out of a train station. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. I am by no means an expert. I am sure there are much better, simpler ways to do some of these things. If you have a certain method that you like to use, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. That is going to do it for this episode, and on the next one, I am going to work on placing a whole bunch of machines. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.